Robert Turbin won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks, does a great job on Sirius XM NFL radio, and he's kind enough to join us right now. Robert, how you been?
I've been great. I'm excited for this weekend, man. Thanks for having me on.
I know you were in a few conference championship games, so let's go in order here. How do you recall Richard Sherman and Michael Crabtree and then the rant that happened afterwards? Like, when did you guys know what Richard Sherman did? Not obviously making the stop, which was huge. That led to the interception, but that interview afterwards, which was always some fun Seattle Seahawks teams.
It was legendary. It's part of the legend who is Richard Sherman. He was always outspoken, whether it was training camp, whether it was a practice during the regular season, whether it was a walkthrough the night before the game. If he felt something that he needed to get off his chest, he was going to let you know. And that night was no different.
You would think the Super Bowl is going to be the toughest game of your career because in an ideal world, it's two great teams, it's wire to wire, and it's decided right at the end. The Super Bowl you guys won up against the Broncos, I was there at MetLife Stadium. I'll never forget it. There was two Seahawks fans in front of me. They were throwing Skittles in the air, like right out of the gate, and then they disappeared at the end of the first quarter. And I didn't see them the rest of the game because the game was basically over right away. And I'm getting on the train to go home, and I run into these two guys, and they could barely walk because they're drunk as a skunk, and they already started to party early. That Super Bowl victory that you guys had, like, how do you look back at it? Because the game was over, and you guys were champions so early, even though there was still time left on the clock.
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, it's one of the most memorable things that has happened in my career. And I was so young, I was only in my second year, and so you really don't understand or even sometimes appreciate, what you just accomplished because, we end up going back to the Super Bowl, obviously, again next year. But outside of that, man, I never even touched the playoffs. Only one other time was I in the playoffs the rest of my 8-year career. And so then you start to realize as you become a veteran how slim, these opportunities are. But, I've got stories galore that I can tell you about that night. But it was, and I'll tell you this too, it was a tough game until it wasn't. Okay. So it was one of the most amazing nights of my life for sure.
Give me a story about Marshawn Lynch because there's so many legendary stories about him, but you got to be with him day in and day out and share that running back room with him.
Yeah, man. God, I don't even know where to start. Marshawn was just such a special player. It was just like, he would do things in practice. Like you guys saw him play, but he would do things in practice that just make you say, wow, and then you understood, why he's such a great player and why he's on his way, to the Hall of Fame. But I remember when I was a rookie and, Marshawn and I are from the Bay Area. And so, when you come in as a rookie, okay, everything's kind of outlined for you. Then you play the season. And when the season's over, this is like your first opportunity to get a crack at the off season. This is something that most people don't talk about because you don't really know how to navigate that, organize it, structure it. When do you train? When do you not train? When do you start? How long should you take a break, et cetera? And so I go up to Marshawn and I'm like, hey, man, can I train with you this off season, And he looks at me, he goes, I don't train. I was like, okay. That was that. Like, he didn't try to like come back or obviously he looked out for me, later on, but he left it at that. And I was just like, I was just this young kid confused as hell on how to approach my first off season. It was pretty funny.
You think so much goes into a craft like that, but it's crazy how Marshawn Lynch, it's such a powerful running back, be like, I don't train. Adrian Peterson would used to eat like a bunch of junk food. That was always highlighted. It's amazing how they could be that elite. And obviously there's work that goes into it, but how they do some things that like regular people would do, eat junk food and not train and just like skip some workouts and things like that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, at the end of the day, we are who we are. You talked about Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman used to come into the facility in the morning with McDonald's breakfast. That was like the thing. The years that we went to the Super Bowl, like McDonald's breakfast was like the number one food item in the locker room during those couple years. And guys would take orders and everything, come back with a bunch of hash browns, and stuff like that. So, we talk about these strict diets and typically that starts to kick in as you get a little older in your career, man. But when you're young and you feeling it, it's whatever.
I'll never forget that game where it was Seahawks and Packers. I was actually at the AFC Championship game, and I was watching the ending of that because I think you guys were the first game, and I was in the radio booth before the Patriots were getting ready, I believe, to play the Colts, I think it was, and I just couldn't believe it. And there's moments like that in the NFL where it looks like one team's going to go, and then something happens, and it's like, oh my goodness gracious, I can't believe that. You were a part of it. How do you look back at that NFC Championship game up against Green Bay?
Man, that game was crazy. I don't even know what was going on with us offensively and why we just couldn't really get anything going. Respect to Aaron Rodgers and those boys in Green Bay for what they had as a football team. They had some ballers, don't get me wrong, but we couldn't get anything going, on offense. But our team all the time, we were always just like this positive, reinforcing, overly optimistic football team. Coach Pete Carroll kind of trained us in that way, that we just always believed that the miracle is going to happen for us, and it did. And we ended up kicking that onside kick. I forget the tight end's name, but he's supposed to let that ball go by him. That's everybody knows that in an onside kick situation, but he was undisciplined in that particular play, and we end up taking advantage. The ball bounced our way that night.
And then 2 weeks later, you don't need me to remind you what happened right at the goal line, but that was such a huge moment in NFL history. And I've talked about it through the years with guys like Cliff Averill and KJ Wright, and it's been nasty between Richard and also Russ. Like, does that hurt you to see where the relationship is with Russ and some of your former teammates now?
It doesn't really bother me because I don't really know the details behind it all. You've spoken to those guys, and so I'm sure that they've been a little bit more outspoken in terms of where there may be a rift or not a rift or anything like that. But it's been a lot of years, man, that have kind of passed by, and I think the most important thing to remember with anybody, that unless something really, really strong is happened between any two players, that at some point it ends for everybody. We move on and we transition into our next careers. Everybody lives, not to get too deep into this thing, but it comes to an end. And so you don't want, all that stuff to happen, and then you're holding a grudge because of something that's so minor, that doesn't really have a real imprint on life itself.
What was it like to be a teammate of Russell Wilson when you were in Seattle?
It was great. Russ was the ultimate teammate. He used to organize off-season workouts for the offense down in Southern California. We used to go to Hermosa Beach. He organized that whole thing. I remember the first time I had sushi and albacore and all this kind of, what I'm saying? And that was all Russ. Russ put all of that together, created this bond. Not everybody showed up, but it was important for him to connect with the group in that way. And then, I remember when we were down there, he had developed some relationships within the Lakers organization. And I remember the first time I got to see Kobe play live. Russ put that together. The whole offense, really, up at Staples Center. That was 2 years in a row. I got to see Kobe play, and it wasn't like we were sitting in the nosebleeds or anything like I don't know what he did, but we were like row 3, row 4, like watching Kobe, and the Lakers like play at Staples Center. And that was the kind of teammate he was, man. He was one of those guys that really embraced wanting to be a leader and wanted to embrace like sharing experiences with his teammates. And those are the memories that I'll always have about him.
It's kind of crazy, though, as Robert Turbin is here with us. A guy goes from being on the top of the world, and you never know how quickly he could fall off. But once he had his split from Seattle, he was just never that same player. And now people are debating, is Russell Wilson still going to be a guy that goes to the Hall of Fame? Where do you stand on that topic whenever Russ decides to hang it up and then he waits 5 years if he should be a Hall of Famer one day or not?
I mean, I would vote him in the Hall of Fame, but at the same time, I don't really think we all have a true understanding of the criteria of what it takes, to get in. And so it'd be an interesting time, for him when that time comes around. But I think his story is still being written. He hasn't retired or anything like that. Obviously he's a little long in the tooth these days, but anything can happen. That's his mentality. I can tell you that right now. That's what I know about him, and it's been unfortunate what sort of the outlook for him has been from a media standpoint. But when you look at the actual results compared to maybe who he's been replaced with since he's left the Seahawks, statistically, it hasn't really been that much different, for him. I just think that he's been in unfortunate situations where the embracement, if that's even a word, really wasn't quite there for him. But the story's still being written, and we'll see how it plays out.
Does this Seahawks team that is one win away from going to a Super Bowl, does it remind you of some of the Seahawks teams that you played for?
No doubt. These guys are relentless. But more than anything, when you watch them play, you can tell that they're playing for each other. They're a selfless unit out there. And, when I was with the Seahawks, that's what it was all about until it wasn't, until, some of those egos and things of that nature started creeping in. But at first, man, it was all about the next guy. And that's what today's Seattle team is all about. And I think it's in large part why they're in this position.
Offensively, I'm going to be curious this week because Charbonnet is now out for the season. We know the 1-2 punch of Walker and Charbonnet was such a really good duo together. How do you think they pick up the slack of losing a Charbonnet? Because I turned to a playmaker like a Rashid Shaheed. I looked at how the Patriots used to use Cordell Patterson when he came over, and I would expect him to get a few touches coming up this weekend.
Yeah, you might see that in the game plan. It wouldn't surprise any of us, but Kenneth Walker III is no stranger to carrying a ball 20 plus times in a football game. And this season against the Rams, he's had a lot of success. I think that first game he went over 100 yards, had a big game actually, only 11 carries in that matchup, but really took it to him. And in the second game, he carried the ball 16 times in that matchup, had about 70 yards, scored a touchdown in that game. And so he's been able to find success against this Rams defense this season. And overall, he's been used to being a guy that is the bell cow, for lack of a better way. He's been the starter before, and I think they'll still lean heavily on his skill set.
You look at Sam Darnold, people called him a bust, which was fair. Then he turns it around. The last 2 years, he's been a really good quarterback. Now the conversation is, how is Sam going to play in a big game with how last year ended? How do you think Sam Darnold's going to perform coming up on Sunday?
I think he'll be fine. I think he's a prime example of, a guy, you can't put a timeline on a player's development. Like I remember after my rookie year, Coach Tom Cable was our run game coordinator. If you remember, he used to be the head coach of the
Raiders,
Oakland Raiders, when he was there. And I remember going into OTAs my second season, and he comes up to me at practice and he says, "Hey, Turbo, you had a nice rookie year. Most players, this is when they make the biggest jump in their careers. It's from year 1 to year 2, and you really get to sort of identify what type of player you're going to have." But that didn't happen for me. My biggest jump was like year 4 to year 5. That's when my development, that's when I started to really feel, like I was sort of taking those next steps in my career. And it wasn't until 2016 where I led the Colts in touchdowns that season, where, I really sort of had a breakout year, per se. And you can say the same thing about Kyle Pitts now. He just finished his 4th season. It was year 3 to year 4 for him to be able to sort of take that jump in his career. So that timeline, it just happens differently for everybody, and your situation around you is a big component of that as well.
But what's your best guess, Robert Turbin? Because we've seen these two teams play twice. They're no strangers to one another, be it NFC West foes. The first time, or one of the times they played, Darnold threw 4 interceptions. They missed that kick at the end, which they could have won it from 61 yards out. And then the other time, it was a big Rams lead, and the Seahawks came on back, and they ended up winning the game in overtime. On Sunday, how do you see this one playing on out between the Seahawks and the Rams, part 3?
Yeah, I think the Seahawks win this football game. They got the home crowd. The 12s are going to be rocking. You already know. But this is a sound football team. They don't make a lot of mistakes, especially on defense. They don't get penalized a lot. I mean, they play real good, disciplined football. And I think that gives them the edge against a Ram team that sometimes is a little fickle with their discipline on both sides of the football, whether it's a break in coverage by their secondary or, some sort of offsides or holding penalty, on the offensive side of the football. I think they'll generate enough pressure against Matthew Stafford to make him a little bit uncomfortable. And so, we'll see what happens, but I got the Seahawks.
When you're in those team meetings, get into the AFC Championship game with Robert Turbin right now, and Bo Nix is now out for the year, and they're quickly getting Jarrett Stidham ready, who's been in the league for a few years. But what do you think that's like this week on the offensive side of the ball for the Broncos getting ready for this one?
Man, you faking it until you make it. That's what it is. And that's the truth. They can say all they want in the media. They're saying all the right things, and that's great. But, I've been a part of teams where we lost our franchise quarterback. I was with the Colts when Andrew Luck got hurt. And as much as we believed in Jacoby Brissett and Scott Tolzien, who was one of our other backup quarterbacks, it was just different. It was different because Andrew Luck was such a special playmaker and player. I was with the Cowboys when Tony Romo hurt his back, and Matt Castle ended up being, the starter. And look, Matt Castle was a guy who, led the Patriots to the playoffs one year. But the fact of the matter is, we lost Tony Romo, and it just wasn't the same in those huddles, the adjustments at the line of scrimmage, the command, in the huddle, and everybody believes and everybody's playing for each other. But the fact of the matter is it's different. And so the Broncos, look, I get it. You're one game away. You're going to say all the right things, but there's going to be a drop-off, and everybody's going to see it on Sunday.
Last thing I'll ask you. Philip Rivers today is interviewing for the Bills head coaching job. What do you make of that one?
I say congratulations to Philip Rivers. Go get it, man. Go get it. The NFL is it's pro sports in general, man. It's a funky world. JJ Redick becoming the head coach of the Lakers. Things happen, man. And sometimes organizations like to, do things that are a little bit outside of the box. It sucks for other coaches who've been on the grind for 15, 20, 25 years, trying to make their way into the head coaching ranks, at some point. But sometimes, man, it just happens for you. You want to think a little bit outside of the box. And so I personally, I like it. And we'll see what happens.
I don't know if this will resonate with you because, right, you had Pete, but I feel like coaching now, it's so different where like people just look for CEOs, and I get it. There's young, innovative offensive minds that get hired like McVay, but I really feel like the characteristics people look for right now are player coaches that aren't doormats. And that's kind of like what Pete Carroll, I thought Pete Carroll was a player's coach, and you guys liked him, but when he spoke, he meant business. That's what I think coaching really has become now.
Well, I think it's also relatability too. A lot of these coaches that are getting head coaching jobs, you're seeing a lot more former players, in these spots, and they've got some youth to them. And so, there's a relatability factor that I think really helps culminate a good football team that can sustain itself over a long time. And so we'll see if that trend continues. But yeah, I wouldn't mind having Philip Rivers as my head coach. I know our offense is going to be crazy.
He's Robert Turbin, Super Bowl champion. Now does a great job with Sirius XM NFL Radio. Robert, appreciate the time. Thanks for jumping on.
Anytime. Thank you.